And so I was talking to my friend who's very conservative, and very Second Amendment rights, and you know what I mean? Like, I have insurance in case I were to have to do self-defense. Like, he's like that kind of a guy. He knows what I'm talking about. He probably would laugh hearing me say this, but he was like, well, the Republican Party actually has stances on these things that are pro this way too. Why is this idea of the poor and the marginalized, in your view, something that's polarizing, where if you talk about it in a very direct way, it might get under people's skin who are from the more conservative side of the spectrum?
That is part of the solution. It doesn't really dive yet into, okay, what do we believe, socialism or free markets? Again, I think those things start to fade to the background the more you look at people's faces.
All right. Hey, welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we discuss the principles behind the plans. My name is Dave.
And my name is Jeff, and we're glad you've joined us for today's episode.
Glad you joined us. All right, we're in part 2 now of our podcast series that we are calling Sexuality, Social Justice, and the Sacredness of Life, where we kind of are covering 4 major topics that sort of divide political parties that sometimes get ignored within the church on either side. And so we want to take a full deep dive.
Yeah, and so in the last episode, we talked a lot about these 4 issues. They were outlined by Pastor Tim Keller, who is the pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church. He was on a podcast with Carey Nieuwhof, the Carey Nieuwhof podcast. It was in the winter of 2020, if you want to pick up that episode and listen to it to get some context. And he talked about how these 4 issues that should unite us all, that tend to divide us because the culture around us is divided on these 4 issues. So the 4 issues were every Christian should be for helping the poor and the marginalized, should be against racism, should be pro-life, for the sanctity of life, and should stand for the New Testament sexual ethic. And these are 4 things that should unite us, but often divide us because 2 of them tend to be a red political issue and 2 of them tend to be a blue political issue. And so in the church world, there's often a polarization because we live in a polarized culture. So we're going to take one at a time and handle these hot potato issues.
Hot potato?
Is that the right way to say it?
Sure. We'll go with it.
Because we say, now is a time where we got to talk about this stuff. Like, we can't not talk about it because people are talking behind closed doors but not talking to each other. And I think the role of pastors and leaders is really to get in the middle of it all and to try to make sense of it and to bring a biblical perspective. So we're going to do the dangerous task of stepping into the middle of it all. How about that?
Yeah, probably with the least of the dangerous issues to start with.
Yes. And we should say that when we get into some issues that maybe we may need some help to talk about it, right? So some of these topics will not just be Jeff, Dave, father, son, pastor at Allison Park Church conversation, but we may bring some other people into the equation to have a fuller conversation. So that's something we'll tease you can look forward to.
Specifically when it comes to the issues of racism and also with the sacredness of life.
Yes, those 2.
We'll bring in some other voices. Because while we do believe in the universal truths applied to Scripture, it is helpful to have people with different standpoints, different experiences who can
help us talk about the issue.
Yeah, exactly. With some different cultural views.
And we've been talking about this anyway. If you've been a regular podcast listener for a while, we have been discussing the idea of maybe changing it up a bit with some guests on occasion. And so this will be the beginning of that because we really need help on these issues, but also because this is just a plan we have in mind to try to broaden our perspective a little bit.
Exactly. Okay, so episode 2, part 2 of the series, Sexuality, Social Justice, and the Sacredness of Life. We are going to be focusing on the social justice part of it, I guess, or one piece of that.
One piece of it, yep.
Which is for the poor and the marginalized.
Now, let me just say, I know that even using the term social justice is a trigger to many people. So let's step away from the term for a minute, can we? And say, let's just focus on the issue itself in this particular thing and say the poor and the marginalized. Because there's a whole worldview around the social justice thing that triggers both sides of the equation.
But I kind of like that. Well, and
okay.
Here's why I say that. I think if there are things that tend to trigger us, those are, in my opinion, those should trigger us to learn more.
Okay.
Like they shouldn't just trigger anger or outrage or how could they. I think that if there's anything that you're finding triggering, especially about a buzzword or a topic, that word or topic should not be enough to stop you from walking through that door. Because again, we just discussed this in our last episode.
But here's the thing. This is a big part of where the turmoil is, and that is arguing over terminology
And language.
Is
sure.
it biblical justice? Is it social justice? Is it compassion? I mean, how do we talk about these things? And honestly, language is also a part of the battle.
It's a huge part.
Yeah. So when we use a term, people might assume, okay, I see which side of the aisle you are on here, and we are genuinely trying not to take a side. We are trying to be a bridge builder and be in the middle of the conversation. So I will yield the floor to you. We can use that term. I just wanted to put a little caution out there.
No, it's okay. I mean, I don't want anybody to feel immediately closed off by us using a buzzword or term, but I think that this is such a healthy exercise to dive into things that might trigger people one way or the other, because we are not agitators, or what's the word? We're not trying to provoke people to get a reaction. What we're trying to do is dive into things that are a little bit more sensitive, with dignity and respect for all people, to take a look at what we believe the Bible says, which applies to all truths, all cultures, all people.
Yeah. And as hungry learners, not as experts on every topic, but as hungry learners to try to find the best solution to the challenges at hand.
Yes, right. But as Christians who believe in truth that's universal and not just different truths for different people, we have to talk about everything.
Right.
And
if we have the expertise, it would be in the area of trying to bring biblical universal truth to the table in the midst of these discussions.
To start the conversation, even if we don't, because we don't know everything. In fact, we don't even know most of it. We just are having conversations and doing the best we can with it.
Okay, so hopefully we have now helped you not to be offended by anything we're going to say.
Yeah, and if you're concerned, just keep listening. That's the challenge for you. Keep listening with an open mind, open ear, with the goal of empathy and understanding other people, and ultimately understanding the biblical truth that we're trying to discuss today.
There we go. Okay, so now let's go for it.
Okay, so we're talking about the idea of the poor and the marginalized. So tell me, in your view, why is this controversial? I know this. So here's what I'll start by saying. I was talking to somebody that comes to my church, to the Northside campus, and we were discussing these 4 social issues. And Tim Keller says, these tend to be divided, and there's pressure to not focus on these depending on which side you're on. And so I was talking to my friend who's very conservative, and very Second Amendment rights, and you know what I mean? Like, I have insurance in case I were to have to do self-defense. Like, he's like that kind of a guy. He knows what I'm talking about. He probably would laugh hearing me say this, but he was like, well, the Republican Party actually has stances on these things that are pro this way too. But there's still this sense, especially with people that don't tend to be on the right side of the political spectrum, that the poor and the marginalized are largely ignored or under-prioritized, underprivileged, whatever you want to say. Why is this idea of the poor and the marginalized, in your view, something that's polarizing, where if you talk about it in a very direct way, it might get under people's skin who are from the more conservative side of the spectrum?
Well, okay, it has to do with a commitment to economic systems. One side believes in capitalism and the free market as the solution to all problems. The other side believes in government intervention and socialism as the solution to all problems. And so the battle lines are drawn there around your belief in economic structures and systems. I think it should be fairly said that both sides believe that their economic strategy is the best for the poor and the marginalized. So those that are on the conservative side and believe in the free market, they actually believe truly that is the best help for the poor and the marginalized. Those who are on the socialistic or even Marxist side, because I think there is a part of the conversation that's there, believe that it's impossible to reform society enough unless there is, aggressive government intervention to level the playing field. And that's where the difference lies. It's that belief in economic systems. And I will say that, my wife's parents, David and Bonnie Spencer. David, of course, has passed a couple years ago. They pastored in Nicaragua in the middle of that conflict between the Contras, free market capitalism, and Sandinistas, socialism, Marxism. And they had both people in their church in a very poor nation of Nicaragua. And you could have, aggressive debates over, what is the solution for a place like Nicaragua? Is it Marxism? Is it capitalism? And I think we can tell stories. I mean, obviously, in the industrial age, right here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we were the center of production of steel. And there were not good laws in place to protect steel workers. They would work in 80, 90, 100-degree heat, 12 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week to produce steel for these industrialists in Pittsburgh. And overseas, and here in Pittsburgh as well, there were no child labor laws. And so children were being exploited by these...
Exploited.
Exploited. They were being exploited by these capitalists who were making money hand over fist. A lot of buildings in Pittsburgh are named after these capitalists. And they were exploiting the worker.
Sure.
Okay? So in the book of James, it says, beware. If you are exploiting people, God takes that very seriously, right? So there is the abuses of the capitalistic system where oftentimes those who have no economic power or status in society get run over. On the other side, you have the communist era that blew up during the last century, and they estimate as many as 100 million people were murdered in the capitalist system.
No, the communists.
And communists, yeah, in the communist system, both in China and in Russia and other parts of the world.
Right.
So you can point to both systems and say massive flaws here. And in fact, there are some communist countries, like you can see the contrast between North Korea and South Korea today. One is capitalistic and prosperous. The other is communistic and poor as can be. That contrast was seen in the 80s between East and West Germany, is seen in Cuba. I mean, so neither economic system is perfect. And I think we have to admit that. And so, but that is where the divide tends to come from.
And neither of us are economic experts.
We are not.
So
although you've been reading on the subject, right?
Some, not enough to speak on it authoritatively, but I understand more than I did. And it's confusing because if you're just an average person, you're not into finance, especially the global economy, which a lot of economists don't even fully understand. It's really hard to get these issues. And on one hand, it seems like, okay, like I've seen a lot of things, with younger people, millennials and Gen Z, it's popular to have like a shirt that says like expletive capitalism. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, or it's just like, the idea of corporate greed. And I mean, the reality is in America, the top 20% of earners have actually 50% of the income that comes in. Like there is massive economic inequality. And that's within a capitalist system. So some things probably need to change because it's becoming more and more where our system is making, where there are more and more poor and marginalized than there ever have been in our country. And it will probably continue for a lot of reasons that are super complicated and complex.
Yeah. And yet the other side of that is there are more laws and protections and provisions for those who are marginalized and poor, especially in American society. A couple of weeks ago, we did a message about how to handle your money. And we talked about the fact that we received in stimulus money last year during the pandemic more money than 25% of the world makes in their whole year. Mm-hmm. So in American society, we're talking about we are the wealthiest country on earth.
You mean from the stimulus checks that each person
Yeah, so
got,
right. So what I received in stimulus money from the government, which is bonus to any income that I made, was more than families make in 25% of countries in the world. So 1/4 of the world didn't make in a whole year what we got in stimulus checks from the government.
Sure.
So somewhere in there's this balance of things where it's unequal, and yet in America we are doing comparatively better than the rest of the world. But then that brings up the question, well, what about the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Like, don't we have a responsibility to talk about them as well?
So quick side note.
Yeah.
And if economics is not your thing and this all kind of bores you, we won't dive too deeply.
Yeah.
Really, the heart of this is to talk about the poor and the marginalized and our role as the church. But as far as some of what I have been reading to understand, there's a book that I'm in the middle of called Why Nations Fail, and it talks about economic inequality from a global perspective. And a lot of what happens is people that get in power in really systemically poor societies is people in power. They're called extractive societies, where the top people actually keep the rest of the country in poverty so that they can have their own private jets and the nicest things. And so America, with all of our imperfections, is far, far, far more economically fair or equal. There's more economic equality here than there is almost anywhere else. I mean, the average American, I think, makes like 20 times what somebody might make in Cuba or parts of Africa. I mean, we are extremely blessed. But even with all that being said, there are still places, probably in every city, in every place you might live, where there are people that are really, really in need.
There's food insecurity issues all over the place, and people don't have enough to go. Even in a wealthy country, there are still issues.
Absolutely.
So I think that we have to admit that there are three institutions that are all contributors to solutions when it comes to this. The first is the church. That's what we represent as pastors and leaders. The second is the government, which we just said an economic system is supported by whatever government you have, free market, socialism, whatever. And the third, which is often the overlooked institution that is a massive key to everything, is the family. And all three of these institutions, established by God, are meant to contribute to the well-being of society. And I think when we think about the poor and the marginalized, let's start, if we can, Dave, and talk about the role of the church. Because, okay, we mentioned the government. That's one factor. But what about the church? What's our role in advocating for or solving the issues of poverty and the struggle of the marginalized?
So why don't we do it this way then? Let's systematically go piece by piece of those three systems you just talked about: the government, the family, the church. Because I think that, or I guess the church is the first one we're going to start with. Maybe we'll go in the reverse order of that.
Right.
But we'll hit those one at a time. So do you want to start us off with what the biblical precedent is when it comes to talking about the poor and the marginalized?
Yeah, so with all of these four topics that we're going to get into over the next few episodes, my conviction is to go back to the early church and the history of the New Testament and see how they approached all of these issues and to use that as our model, okay? So the New Testament provides the model for us about how to live, what we believe, how we function. Okay, so in the New Testament, what we see is that the book of Acts, after the Holy Spirit was poured out, the book of Acts created community that wasn't just that they felt emotionally connected to one another or that they were praying for each other, but they were becoming radically generous. So in Acts chapter 4, it says that Barnabas sold his land and gave it up so that the people who were poor in a city could have their needs met. There was this statement in Acts chapter 4. It says, there were no needy persons among them. So that once you became a part of the church, once you gave your life to Jesus Christ, the church was so radically generous that they did not allow for anyone to exist in their midst that somebody wasn't caring for. So they created systems to care for the widow and the orphan and the poor. And part of the reason why so many people were converted to Christianity was that the church created such effective systems of caring for the poor and the marginalized that it magnetized people in the world to say, if that's what this is all about, I want to be a part of it. So the church didn't look to the government to solve the problem. They didn't lobby Rome for changes in the welfare system. They didn't create some kind of pressurized organization to try to change the system, even in Jerusalem. They said, we are going to take care of our own, and we're going to love the people that God brings to us. And that became a part of the movement of what Christianity was.
Yeah, that was actually in an exploitative, extractive society.
It was.
In Rome. Where
total dominance.
They enslaved people, and they would rip them off and overtax and oppress on purpose. I mean, explicitly, not like, systemically in a covert way where you have to, I mean, it was intense in your face. And so the church really started to solve a problem that there was no focus on for most of the society.
And so if you are somebody that believes in the free market and the capitalistic version of economics, and you think that's in the best interest of everybody, you can't then go biblically into your house and lock yourself behind your garage door and never have any contact with the needs around you.
Absolutely.
You have to, if you are going to believe in capitalism and the free market, what that compels us to do is to be incarnational, to be meaning that we live amongst the people, like Jesus came and was incarnate with us. We live amongst people, we're aware of their needs, and we become radically generous to change the dynamics of the communities around us. I think that if you're a socialist, I don't think that lets you off the hook to say, well, the government's going to handle this. They took all my taxes. No, I think radical generosity is just the way of the believer. You've got to be open. You've got to be engaged. You've got to be aware. You've got to be willing to share and willing to give. Honestly, I think the church that we're a part of, Allison Park Church, has historically been that way. Not to say we're perfect. I think we probably have a long way to go to make the kind of impact on the community like the early church did in Jerusalem. But I think that's the standard, is radical generosity, community awareness, deep love, willingness to sacrifice, caring for the marginalized, caring for the poor in a very personal way. That's what we see modeled for us in the New Testament church.
Yeah, and I don't think we want to dive yet, because we'll do this systematically. I don't want to dive yet fully into the government systems of how our economy should run. But if you could boil down, so we're saying the church needs to be the forefront. What would that look like? What are we striving to do right now as Allison Park Church, and what do you see us striving to become in the future in order to be incarnational in our communities?
Yeah, so some of the things that we do is dealing with food insecurity, which is in some communities a significant need. We were just yesterday with one of the women from our campuses going door to door delivering food. And what she was doing was not just delivering food; she was actually stopping to pause. She's involved with these people's lives.
Awesome. Robin.
Yeah, so it was a very incarnational thing. It was very powerful. It was tangible. It was emotional. It was connection. It was personal. So that's one thing. I know there's some churches that have strategically decided not to move out of declining spaces, urbanly in declining spaces, so that they could be physically present amongst a place of need. We love to plant campuses where the one lives, meaning that there are neighborhoods that are often overlooked, that may be economically depressed.
You didn't define the one. You might want to say
the one person who's forgotten, disconnected from God, overlooked, hurting. That's the person that we want to go after, because that's the person Jesus died for, right? So we want to go into those communities of need and be present. I think, years ago we planted a church in the city of Sharpsburg, which is along the rivers of the city of Pittsburgh, and the city got hit by a flood and the whole city was underwater. And through the Network of Hope, a nonprofit we have, and the local church there, Sharpsburg Family Worship Center, we worked with the Red Cross to be the relief agency for the whole city, delivering furniture, clothing, cleaning homes out, providing food. That is, I think, what we're talking about, that kind of radical involvement in a time of need. So I think we can say that most churches are at least leaning in that direction. Sometimes it's hard to know how to solve these very deep problems of poverty that may be generational. And I think that leads us into some questions about the family, but I'm not sure if you want to go there yet, Dave. But I think then there's the issues of the church also has a role in helping there to be healthy families, because the stats are when there's not a present, active father in the home, the family is much more likely to be involved in issues of poverty. Having a healthy, active, mature dad is one of the keys for a family to exit from a cycle of generational poverty.
Yeah, why don't we go there now for a second? So you said one of the key institutions, probably the key institution, is for the church to be engaged in caring for the poor and the marginalized. And we'll get back to what you're talking about with capitalists and stuff within the church, because I think that is key. But we'll pause on that. The second major one we want to talk about is the family.
Right.
And in order to solve issues of poverty, it really means the nuclear family.
The nuclear family. And then church family.
And the church family. Right. But why don't you talk about the family?
Yeah. So issues of lack are not just a matter of I don't have money, but it's learning how to handle the money you have, how to invest it, how to save it, how to have a healthy work ethic, how to be disciplined, how to have sustainable character upon which you can build something. Husbands and wives who manage to stay together, build on an economic system that doesn't get ripped in half when you get divorced. That's not a healthy economic decision often, because you got the division of assets and then children moving back and forth. So there's just so many things about a healthy nuclear family with, like I said, a mature mom and dad that's investing good character and discipline into their children that makes for the ability, you know what they say, right? People who win the lottery, 50% of them blow the whole thing in a matter of weeks or years. And many of them say, this was the worst thing that ever happened to me. So sometimes getting a lot of money isn't the answer to actually being wealthy. It's actually having the wisdom and the discipline to know what to do with what you have. And so now we're talking about the family unit is there as a crucible to train and build young men and women who know how to make wealth and how to maintain it and how to invest it and how to save it and how to be stewards of it. And so the family unit, that's part of what it's designed to do.
Right. And so I think it's important to acknowledge when we're talking about solving issues that apply to the poor and the marginalized, one of the best and the most important things we can do is to try to help the nuclear family unit thrive.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a movement that I would definitely say is misguided, if well-intentioned, that is, it talks a lot about destabilizing the nuclear family, about how it takes a village to raise a family and not just...
Well, and we would say that there's nothing wrong with it takes a village, and we believe the church is a part of that village. Yeah,
Sure.
There should be a lot of people contributing to the family unit, but I don't think anything takes the place of God's original intent of husband and wife together raising their family, especially if you have Christian godly influence.
Right. Well, and for any single parents out there, we want to be fully supportive of you. And we think
absolutely.
You're doing incredible work. And
heroes.
This is not to say anything that what single parents are doing is not contributing enough.
No, we're talking about systemic issues. And so if we're going to talk about it objectively, we would say where the family unit can maintain health and integrity, and where there is parents that are training children in wisdom and character, you're going to have the greatest chance to be good stewards of the resources that you have.
So what do you see as the church's role in helping to promote health and stability within the nuclear family?
Yeah, so I think modeling healthy family, that's what leadership, there are standards of leadership in the New Testament were to make sure that those who were put in positions of leadership modeled this for everybody else. It was one of the criteria of being in leadership. I think training on it, discipleship is all a part of it. Being there for the widow and the orphan and the single mom, and to provide, if there isn't a male role model or a female role model in a child's life, to provide that through your church family. This is the whole takes a village thing. Yeah, so that they're surrounded with the resources and the care that is needed. I love we started this program called Treasured Kids here, which supports families that are fostering children that don't have a home, so that more and more families can bring a child into their home who is basically in the system, but they have somebody surrounding them to give them a break, to babysit for them, to provide meals for them, to be a resource for them when they're going through difficult times, because it's a lot to take somebody into your own house. But that's one of the massive solution makers, I think, for changing generational poverty, which is to raise up children who have character, wisdom, and maturity so that they can be entrusted with the wealth, and that sustains from generation to generation. And I think that's one of the undervalued, under-talked about issues is this necessity of the family.
Yeah, and I think there might be some people that are even listening that have heard about things like treasured kids, where maybe God's been prompting them, like, you should think about this.
Yeah.
So this might be a friendly reminder, if you're hearing this again and God's already been speaking to you, to maybe look into the program, because foster families and adopting families are so key to the biblical ethic of supporting the poor and the marginalized and giving people a shot at being in a healthy, stable family, but especially where they can know Jesus and the love of Jesus through these kind of practical means.
Yeah, because who is more marginalized than someone in the foster care system?
Absolutely.
Or how about this one? This is also a systemic problem, and that is inmates coming out of prison.
Yeah.
So we're trying to start a prison campus specifically so that we can build a relationship with people not just are in prison, but their family units. And then you have organizations like the Trade Institute of Pittsburgh, which takes young men and women who are coming out of incarceration and gives them a skill, how to lay brick, so that they can get a good paying job, so that you're doing more than just giving them a check to support their family every month, but you're giving them a skill so that they can have the pride of earning their own paycheck and the dignity of having a job And then it becomes a sustainable way for them to build their own family, because in the system, when you're in the prison system, oftentimes the recidivism rate is so high that without the ability to sustain life outside of the system, you end up going back in. And then there is this perpetuation of this generational curse that's there, because nobody's giving them the practical means to be able to make a life for themselves. Yeah. So it's not as simple, even in a socialistic system, of just giving people money. There has to be something beyond that in order for true wealth to take root in somebody's life.
Right. You know, and as like I'm hearing all this, I think one application that I hope will resonate with some people is if your family is from an economically stable strata, right? And you're doing fine, you're doing well, whatever. Like, I think it's so important that as followers of Jesus, we engage with the needy. Yeah. So if you're not really engaged with that part, all you're doing, like, man, I want to be careful with how I say this here, because I think there's ministry that needs to happen everywhere. But if you're not engaged in any sense with the poor and the marginalized, I think it would be a really big step to challenge yourself to be uncomfortable and to do some things that are going to engage with that part of the mission. Even just something like coming to a campus, one of our campuses that has a lot of people that are poor and marginalized there, in that...
and building a relationship and
exactly.
a friendship, and going to their house and getting to know them and understanding the needs that are there. I think all of that is very important.
Because it's so easy, especially if you're from the conservative right of Christianity and you've grown up that way, to just see all of these things and be like, man, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But like all these Marxists,
or here's another one of these hot button political issues that I think the church can be involved with. Okay, so one of the big things that's a dividing line between right and left is immigration. How accessible should it be? What's the process of dealing with those who are here in our country that have not yet legally gone through the process? How secure should the border be? That's where all the conversation goes. But Old Testament and New Testament, one of the highest values that was presented by the people of God was the value of hospitality. So when somebody is present in our city as a refugee or an immigrant, our role is not to judge them as legal or illegal.
Absolutely.
It is to say, how can we help you?
Yes.
Like, what can we do that's different? And one of the things your campus does a tremendous amount with is to identify where the refugees are located and how we can serve them. So many of them are here. They don't have health care. They don't have any source of income. They're trying to make it by. Many of them don't speak English. I mean, if Jesus said, if you do it to the least of these, my brother, you've done it unto me. Yeah. So there are some political battles to be fought over how immigration as a system in our nation can be fixed. And it obviously is broken, or I'm not saying it's not. But what I'm saying is interpersonally, there are refugees and immigrants in every city in America. And the role of the church should be to find them, to love them, to serve them, to resource them, and to not make it political when you see their face. Yes. Right? Because that is so huge. So what are some of the things that's happening at Northside?
Well, I was just thinking, one of the people I want to shout out to is my youth pastor, Gia. She actually works for an organization where there are refugee kids that don't necessarily speak English, that are here by themselves. And Gia is a translator, helps to build relationships with these kids and to care for them, to make sure they're going to the right places and the right homes. And, that is a big part of what we want to do. We actually just for Serve Day went into a community called the Northview Heights on the north side of Pittsburgh and played soccer with a ton of kids, a lot of them being refugees from all over, specifically Somalia, I think had a lot of them. And so, I'll just tell you, if you've not traveled much, you've not been out of the country, and if you've not interacted with people that are in need, man, meeting some of these people, getting in a relationship with some refugees or people that are in need will change your perspective, and it needs to. Because if you haven't been exposed to that, it's so easy to feel a little bit calloused or, I don't know, just like you're staying away. But the heart of Jesus, the heart of the church is to be engaged there with need and engaged in caring. And so
one of the things that we did as a family for, I think, all 5 of our kids, of you, Dave, and others. So my sister and brother-in-law, Debbie and Fausto, typically serve in an orphanage in San Luis, Mexico,
Yeah.
where they live on site and work with kids that either are orphans or have been placed in the orphanage because their families can't afford to take care of them. And so when you guys would turn 12 or 13, your first missions experience, we would send you typically with my mom and dad on one of the trips they were leading down there. And you would get the chance to live at the orphanage with the kids and see what they were going through, make friends with them, and become aware that not everything in the world looks like the neighborhood you grew up in. And hopefully make you feel like you want to give your life to doing something to help those who are in a different situation than you. And every one of you came back different from that trip. You all came back saying, well, I loved it there. I can't wait to go back. I mean, what was the impact that had on you, Dave, when you went?
Yeah, we went to a place in Mexico that was a literal dump. Like it was actually a garbage dump where they would take trash, I just want to be clear, like not calling somebody's home a dump. It was literally a garbage dump where there were people that were living in tin huts and shacks and just trying to survive based off of what people would throw away. And that was eye-opening for me, being around those people and seeing like, these are real people. What if I had been born into this?
Yeah.
Like what if this was me? I mean, this is not a choice you make for your life. This is just where you are and it's your situation. And like, there is a real need to care for people and to show them Jesus and to help them, to provide and like you were talking about the bricklayer thing where, you're helping teach people trades, like whatever we can do to engage with the impoverished, that is so important. Like we should not be content with the fact that there's a big class of impoverished people.
Sure.
We shouldn't be okay with that. As a church, we're I think the classic conservative thing would be like, teach a man to fish or give a man a fish. And that can be a really easy way to hide behind that wall. Like, oh, we just want to, but like we need to be doing something,
right?
Giving and teaching how to fish and all of that.
So can you imagine every day we wake up, God sees the plight of everybody on the planet. And he sees that little kid that's grown up fishing through the garbage in Mexico, trying to find something to survive. He's hungry and he's trying to, maybe his parents can't take care of him. And God's heart breaks for that little boy or that little girl. And so the heart of God is broken over the poor and the marginalized and the orphan and the widow and the underemployed and the inmate and the inmate's family. And when he finds somebody, God does on planet Earth, who's willing to say, I'll sell my stuff, I'll take a week off, I'll sacrifice and give. It so touches the heart of God. In fact, it says in the book of Proverbs, he who gives to the poor lends to the Lord. It's like God's going to say, I'll owe you one. Look, if you'll just take a minute and you'll just realize that the problems you're facing are probably not as big as what I can see all around me. And you'll just pause for a moment on feeling sorry for yourself. And you'll look out, you'll see those who are really, really struggling, and you'll give yourself to that. I promise you'll never lack for anything, because I'm longing to find people who will partner with me that will give their lives for the hurting and the poor. And churches that get caught up in the political rancor of the day miss the heart of God, which is for people who don't have and are lacking and don't have an opportunity, and to give them an opportunity or a school to go to or a place to live or food to eat. I mean, it's just such a huge thing. And I mean, you could give your life to that. I mean, honestly, that's something worth living every day for, every day of your life, to make a difference. And maybe the way you do that is to make a ton of money, to build the greatest business you can build. And out of that, to take all of your wealth and pour it into things that are making a difference in the world. That is part of the solution. It doesn't really dive yet into, okay, what do we believe, socialism or free markets? Again, I think those things start to fade to the background the more you look at people's faces and you see real people and real situations, and you start doing something from a New Testament perspective to actually reach out and make a difference in the world. It doesn't mean we don't advocate for change in the way we think that things need to change politically, but certainly we can join hands with people from a different political perspective or even a different economic system to try to make solutions in the world.
I think it's really natural for people to think about what system benefits them and their family the most.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, like regardless as to what part of the economic system you're in, and the lower down you are on that ladder, the easier it is to be like, well, how about us, right?
Yeah,
but
right.
but middle class or upper class, whatever, it's easiest to be thinking like, well, why am I having to do this with my economic system? But at the same time, if we're talking about this idea that there is universal biblical truth, and it's not just this idea that there is no real truth. Truth is all unique and individual, and there's no bias-free truth, right? If we reject that idea and we agree the Bible is our source of truth, then all of us need to see the priority not being benefiting us or ours most, but really taking care of the poor and the marginalized.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be that. And that's economic systems aside.
Yeah.
Whatever would
Well,
work best.
actually, the Bible doesn't present an economic system. The Bible doesn't give us this is the universal truth for how economics should be built into a nation. You can see different styles and approaches throughout the Bible. Like, for instance, Joseph, who's one of the most famous people in the Old Testament, became the second in command of Egypt during a great famine. And the way he fed the world from the grain that he put into Pharaoh's storehouses was to make them sell their property. So basically, Joseph built Egypt into a completely socialistic system. Egypt owned all the land and all the crops. And when the people of Israel became slaves in Egypt, it was because Joseph had made them sell their land and their crops to Pharaoh. So, and Joseph was a man of God, and he built a socialistic system for Egypt. Then you can see on the totally opposite side in the book of Acts, there is no pushback on Rome at all from the church. They decided to help the poor totally through the structure of the local church, and did not indict Rome at all in the process or try to change the Roman system. You would say, well, that's very much pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps and allowing God to prosper you in the midst of wherever you are, which would lean towards that free market side. The Bible doesn't come down hard one way or the other.
Well, how about the disciples? I mean, you have Matthew, who probably would have been interpreted possibly as being right.
Well, no, he was aligned with the Roman government, right?
Okay.
And Simon was the other disciple. He was a zealot who
right,
wanted
right.
to overthrow the Roman government. But both of them set those things aside to serve the purpose of the kingdom.
Sure.
Which I think is the priority in all of these discussions. It's not just the early church and how it functioned, but it is the objective of building the kingdom of God. In fact, here's the promise, Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, bringing the kingdom of God into the areas where people are marginalized and poor, and all these things will be added to you as well. So I think that the mindset here is not to seek a particular economic system, but is to seek the coming of the kingdom of God on earth, because all economic systems, all governmental systems are imperfect and flawed, and people can take advantage of either side for their own greedy purposes.
As they have. Sure.
Yeah, as they have.
Yeah, so let's now dive into that last institution of the government.
Okay.
And
Are you sure? I thought we were coming to a close and we were just going to avoid that part.
No, that's not what we do here. We have to hit this. We've already hit aliens and all. Okay, so this is Tim compared some of that, but I think my experience, because I did grow up in with probably more of a conservative belief system. To be perfectly candid, I have really come way more center, very much. Just the more I've read and understood, the less content I am with really either polarity, right? But I know what I was going to say. So I know people, even still today, where if you hear the word Marxism, it triggers them in general. In fact, some people think of Marxism as being a work of the devil. It is evil in and of itself. And anybody that's a Marxist is trying to destroy the family and destroy the church and Christianity, and they're a part of this movement that has been given by the devil to promote.
Partially because Marx himself believed that religion and God was the opiate of the masses, and believed that along with his economic system, atheism was also necessary.
Right.
Okay, so I think that's part of the reason why it gets that reputation.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, I think the communist experiment really failed.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot of communists anymore. I mean, people that are pushing...
Well, communism and Marxism were almost synonymous, really.
Yeah, but Marxism has had a large influence on socialism, which is sort of a
Yeah. Okay.
subcategory of something that's come out of the Marxist philosophy. But I think just to start with the government system, to me, that is one of those, we were talking in the last episode about how there's this great untruth of life is a battle between good people and evil people.
Right.
And how we need to not see it that way, especially as Christians, where it says, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and, basically the devil and his armies. But I think that it's really easy for people who are raised conservatively to think anybody who has Marxist views, like you're snipping them out, like, I can't believe that they're evil. Like they're for,
right.
They're for this totalitarian system that's trying to destroy Christianity, faith, and promote evolution. But I think like what I think the starting point is maybe going to throw some people off a little bit is the idea that there is no Christian economic system.
Right.
I mean, you were just describing that.
Yeah.
But I've even heard people talk and try to Christianize capitalism. The Constitution and our free market system is all based off of the Bible. And I don't really know that the Bible advocates for capitalism. Not that it advocates against capitalism.
Well, there are some things about our Constitution that are very biblical, like all men are created equal.
Sure, of
even
course.
though that was not fully practiced early on in our country's history.
Right.
The idea of freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom to worship, all these things I think you could say are very aligned with New Testament concepts. Free markets then extend from that idea, right? That you're free and you can do whatever it is that you want to do because freedom is a part of the free market system. But ultimately, the free market system led to the abuses of the industrial era, which brought in some aspects of socialism. So the unions became an aspect to put pressure on industry and pass certain regulations and laws so that workers were not exploited and abused. Child labor laws were restrictions put on by the government so that little kids were not forced to work.
Sure.
The 40-hour work week and an overtime system was put in because these capitalists, industrialists, were using people to the point where people were dying early. A lot of the regulations that we have, the fact that there is a unemployment net for people who lose their jobs to get money so that it sustains them in between, or the fact that there is some kind of welfare system, even the United States of America is a little bit of a balance of the free market and socialistic principles. The question is not so much do we have both, because we do have both things in play. The question is the tension between those things. Where's the pendulum swinging? Is it swinging more towards the free market? Is it swinging more towards more of a socialistic perspective? But both of them are already present within our culture, and imperfectly so, but enough to create the wealthiest planet on earth. Right? And so the systems, everybody's debating on them, and yet at the same time, we would look and say, but something is going well because the economy is still booming, and yet there's a battle over all these concepts. So maybe at times I feel like this is a little bit over my head. Like I don't even know where I would begin as a pastor to try to land with some of these things. But I do think there's enough freedom within our country for the church to be the church and to do what we're called to do, to care for the poor and marginalized.
Yeah.
I think we can become obsessed
with
governmental and economic systems and miss the opportunity that we have to seek the kingdom of God.
Yeah, I think what's a greatest risk with all this thing is we could become so focused on being anti this, anti that, you know what I mean? Anti-Marxism, anti-Trump, whatever it is that really feels like it's our battle. The evil people, life being a battle between good and evil people, that we actually really miss what we're supposed to be for, which is for love and compassion for the poor and the marginalized, for the widow and the orphan, as it says in the Bible. And so, I think it's okay to have opinions on this. I don't think that all of us are called to be totally apolitical. There obviously needs to be some level of politics without having anarchy or chaos. But at the same time, as followers of Jesus, our main thing, the primary thing, always needs to be following Jesus.
Yeah, and acting in love. And if Matthew the tax collector and Simon the zealot could be in the same small group together, certainly you can be in the same church family, working to help the poor and the marginalized with someone who is a Democrat or a Republican, a capitalist, or a socialist.
Yeah.
It is possible. And in fact, some of my good friends from the nation of Sweden are way more socialists than the U.S. is.
Yeah.
And I've spent weeks over there. And these socialist people that I have friendships with in Sweden are wonderful people. And I also know some very capitalistic people who don't like socialism at all, and they're wonderful people. And I just want to say, don't let the label keep you from a relationship, because that's what the real tragedy is that we're no longer joining hands to form what we call bipartisan solutions, especially kingdom solutions in the world.
Yeah, I think as we start to wrap up, one of the things that I think was so important that we've talked about with you and me, and this is a little bit off topic of just caring for the poor and the marginalized, but it's for each individual doing a really good job to assess and take care of your own spirit. Because it's so easy to be focused on things that make you angry. In fact, that's how media companies make their money. That's how, MSNBC and Fox News make their money. It's by reporting every tragedy and every sensationalized piece of news. And it's not that they're all false or that they're all lying. But what it is it's created to polarize and create anger and fear. And as a church, as the church, I should say, as followers of Jesus, I think we need to really take charge to protect our spirit. It might be watching the news channel less.
Yeah.
It might be spending less time on social media. It might be making a rule for yourself that you won't post anything political on social media, because when you do, you don't represent love very well. But whatever it is, I think it's taking stock of where you are. How angry am I? How triggered am I? How frustrated or bitter am I at the other side of the political spectrum? How much do I see them as the problem? Because it is an untruth to see life as a battle between good and evil people. And we need to protect our spirit to make sure that we're sensitive enough to what God is asking us to do, that we're not so blinded by rage or anger or frustration.
Yeah, and your anger against Trump or against Biden is not going to help that little boy who's waiting to find a foster family.
Yeah.
And your frustration at the Marxists or the capitalists is not going to help that inmate that's getting ready to get out of prison and doesn't have a career choice, no place to live. He wants to go back to his family, but he can't get a job. Okay, so let's realize it's not important. It's not unimportant, politics and government and economics, but it's not everything.
Yeah.
If we protect our spirit and we stay focused on the kingdom, we can make a difference no matter what's happening in the larger world around us.
Absolutely. So, caring and protecting the poor and the marginalized is a huge value. Let's talk about some takeaways as far as what people could do if you're listening to this and maybe feeling challenged or convicted that you want to step up to the plate and represent Christ. I'm going to name 3 things, and if I miss anything, you can hit them. But one, we have Treasured Kids, which at Dawson Park Church is our program to, where we connect with foster and adopt ministries to care for kids that are in those systems.
Yep.
The second thing is Kingdom Builders, and these are both Allison Park Church central ministries. And so if you're not in the city or you're somewhere else, check your local churches for what they're doing as well. But
it's our over and above campaign to give towards needs like helping people get out of human trafficking or drilling water wells or providing food through Rise Against Hunger. Those kinds of initiatives. Yeah,
absolutely. And then the last one that I want to plug is the Urban Impact Foundation,
yeah,
which works in the north side of Pittsburgh, specifically developing relationships with people that are, that are in need. That was actually who we partnered with to do a Serve Day, in the Northview Heights. They're incredible.
And they work on the issue of fatherlessness. That's one of their themes.
Yeah,
trying to mentor young men and young women that way. Go on a missions trip. Put yourself in a position, like you said, attend one of the neighborhood campuses or an urban church or maybe one in a rural space that is in a very poor area. Go to the Mexico thing and see kids in an orphanage. Get exposure to the world so that you get a feel for what's going on. Find out where the local immigrants and refugees in your community live and start to go in there and find out what they need and how you can make friends with them. Find somebody who has a different economic view than you, a different political view than you, and have a culturally humble conversation together, and then go on a trip together and get exposed together to what you can do to make a difference in the world. I mean, it's just really choosing to engage is what it is.
We're commanded to love the widow and the orphan, to care for them as the church. I think it is not enough for you to see yourself as a part of a church that does things, and you're not engaging in that. So if you have not taken this step yet for one of these 4 core issues that we're going to dive into, our challenge to you: step up, give the Kingdom Builders, get plugged in with Urban Impact, go on a missions trip, do Treasured Kids, whatever it might be.
And remember, God the Father, his heart is breaking every day over those who are poor and marginalized. And when you step up to the plate and you say, God, I want to be a part of helping somebody, I want to help the one, you get the attention of heaven. Heaven looks like, finally, I have somebody who's willing to carry this burden with me. And I think that in and of itself is worthy. Just, it will put a smile on the face of God if you just take the step to do it.
Yeah, and this is good. It's the example of Jesus. I have so much more I want to talk about with this, but I think that's a really good summary of what we've been discussing this whole time. So again, the first part of this 5-part series, I guess the first major issue is the poor and the marginalized, but we have a lot to look forward to.
Yep.
A lot more coming up.
And we started with the one that was the least controversial, so we're going to dive into more and more as we go along.
Yes. So if you're looking forward to things like the Christian sexual ethic, we're going to talk about Christian sexuality. We're going to talk about racism and racial injustice. We're going to talk about what was the last one?
Pro-life.
Sacredness of life, right? From the womb to the tomb, that whole issue. Those will be things we're going to dive into shortly. And so we would love it if you would consider helping us out. And you can do that a few ways. Spreading the word by liking and subscribing wherever you're listening or watching to this, whether it's Apple Podcasts, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, social media. Please share, leave us a review, whatever you can. We would love to get the word out. So as always, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time.